room for inflation. The RBI governor, as expected, has kept policy rates unchanged. This is exactly what we told you. Most of our respondents in the CNBC TV18 poll had expected, but he has a penchant to do the unexpected as well, and he did. He has cut the SLR by 0.5%. This essentially means banks will now have to invest only 22.5% of their deposits in government bonds against 23% earlier, resulting in less money or less money being available for the government and more for those who want to borrow, such as corporates. Also, the governor indicated that if inflation fell faster, it may give him a chance to cut rates. It is that dovish commentary that, in fact, the market's holding on to. The RBI policy is hence being read as slightly dovish. Is this dovishness premature? Actually, I want to twist that. We have both guests joining us. Lata is here in studio with us, and also joining us on the show, Indranil Pan, Chief Economist at Kotak Mahindra Bank. Lata, the question I want to ask you is not if this dovishness is premature, but more if this means that the next one would be a rate cut.
That is how you would read it. But that doesn't mean the next policy is the rate cut. August 5th is the next policy, not then. But the next move, whenever, 1 year later, three quarters later...
Status quo and then a rate cut.
A further hike would be ruled out.
Totally out, right?
There were only a handful of people out there in the market who were expecting that the next move would be a hike. Those guys are now changing their...
Indranil, would you agree? And when would you expect that rate cut? First quarter FY15?
If you really take my view, I think the key issue is how he actually guides the market from an 8% inflation to a 6% inflation. Now, the only change from the previous policy to this policy has been his guidance in terms of a more balanced sort of risk, both upside and downside to inflation, compared to the upside risks to inflation that he was looking at. But please note that there are certain caveats to that, in the sense that he would need to see fiscal consolidation in a significant way. He would need to see the new government coming out with certain policies so as to rein in the supply-induced food price inflation. So all these are very essential elements that the RBI would sort of need to factor in before it can even talk about a rate cut. So I think it's more or less given that we would probably see 8% till January 2015, but then the next stretch would be that much more difficult from 8 to 6%, which I think the RBI should be focused on.
So, Indranil, would it be fair to say that the governor has been hopefully optimistically dovish, optimistic that the government will carry on with policy that will benefit the markets?
Can I put it a different way?
Yeah, I think in his own sort of, he has been talking about this for quite some time, and we always noted that the monetary policy and the fiscal policy have to go hand in hand in terms of the overall macro balance. So unless the fiscal actually consolidates in a significant way, and unless the demand pressures that are there out of the fiscal sort of come off, monetary policy tightness can not alone sort of lead to...
Go ahead.
I don't think he can hear you. We've disconnected the line.
Okay, we lost it.
Okay, let me put the second question to Lata then, and that has to do with the SLR cut. Maybe in line with the fact that he wanted to bring SLR down anyways over a period of time, but materially, does it actually it will make some more funds available in the system? Will it really impact credit flows? Yeah. Will it cheapen money? Will it impact credit flows? Is there that much demand waiting on the sidelines for this?
No. The amount of money that banks invest in government securities is already higher than 29%.
Yeah, this is a symbolic move,
so this is symbolic, but it is important because he committed on September 4th, and banks in RBI in general has been maintaining that just appropriating 25% of deposits for themselves by the government amounts to financial repression. It's something which in the long range is what the government should bring down. So that way it's taken one more step towards evolution of public finance in India, evolution of financial system. It's pretty much that at the moment. Yeah. But it, for a market which is devoid of good news, this is also a positive signal that as and when you want credit, I have made that much more available to you. But anyway, you're not even taking what I have on offer. But it is to that extent a gesture of goodwill. But just to complete what Indranil started, you asked when will the next cut be? It's not in a long time, because if he wants the rates to go, the inflation level to go to 6% after it touches 8% next year. Now 8% is where the repo is already. So well after January, you should see the inflation drop emphatically and sustainably below that 7.5% mark for him to bring even the first
You have
rate
to
cut.
see it. What you're saying
Yes.
is that inflation has to do this in terms of the glide path.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it has to do it sustainably, not in a one-off way.
Okay.
So I would think it is at least 4 quarters.
Okay, well, were you surprised by the dovishness, or is this the governor, is it the honeymoon effect with the new government?
Well, first let me blame myself. You know, I read that statement and I had read the previous statement thoroughly.
Okay.
So this word that if it falls, then I will cut rates was not there in the April statement, April 1st statement. But somehow that statement seemed familiar to me. It was not there in April for sure. I went back in the January media transcript. At one point he says this. So are we reading too much into this dovishness?
Fair enough.
We could well be. But I would still think, yeah, probably he wanted to hint that, growth is bad enough and lack of growth will push disinflation faster than he expected.
There's no harm in adding to the expectation that things are going to improve, right? I mean,
He
that
could
can
well have
only...
meant that.
Okay.
Yeah. Indranil, we were discussing, and I think when your line got disconnected, we were continuing on the point that you made of when you expect the next cut, but also on the more symbolic nature of his SLR cut of 50 basis points.
Yes, symbolic, but I think it's more in lines with what the RBI would want in terms of the development of the money markets and the financial
I was saying
markets.
that it's part of his longer term plan of where he'd like to bring the SLR down to.
Absolutely. I think, see, from a medium-term perspective, I think he has done this, and then possibly he'll have to wait a little bit more time before he can do further reductions in the SLR. But I think the point is being made very clear once again that fiscal consolidation is absolutely essential and the government should reduce its borrowing program. Otherwise, the government will have to be penalized in terms of paying a higher interest rate to the market because there is no sort of cover to the government from a captive segment to sell its bonds. So I think in terms of the development of the financial markets and the way we should be looking at the government finances and therefore release adequate amount of liquidity for the perspective of growth, for the perspective of pushing money supply, it's absolutely the right move in my opinion.
I just want to add my 2 bit to that. While you spoke about Rajan being charitable to the government,
No, we asked a
on the
question.
contrary,
We didn't say that was the
being
case.
subtly, he's reading that Riot Act subtly to them.
Yeah.
That you
So-
have less
No, but it's
money.
not
on
the
the-
Riot
yeah,
Act, because
on the
actually
whole.
if you see Jaitley's commentary on his blog or otherwise, he's also stressing on fiscal consolidation.
Absolutely, yes.
So I think they're both speaking
On
the same language, albeit they committed from different roles. But Mr. Jaitley's been saying pretty much the same thing. At no point giving away any, scope of any populist move
As
whatsoever.
you bring the
right?
SLR down, the government at the edges will have to pay more because less money is easily available to it for the asking. So in that sense also, it is uneconomical for them to have too much of an expenditure.
All right.